to Sunday with Cows. I'm on a hill outside of Nashville, Tennessee, but I'm not out in the field today. I'm on my front porch. I'm recovering from COVID, doing fine, but it's 102 air temp today, and it feels like 115. So I'm going to stay here on the porch instead of walking that long field over to the cows, so I hope you don't mind. But I want to talk to you today about what does it mean when you don't have a voice? What does it mean when you feel like your voice doesn't matter? What happens to you and what happens to society when we all just remain silent? So that's what I want to talk about today, continuing in the life of Elijah. Oh, and a great announcement, the new book, Elijah, is out. We have only 15 of these right now, and so they're numbered 1 to 300, so it's a limited edition. We're only making 300. These are handmade, by the way, so you can see where they're sewn in the middle. The first one, number 1, is going to sell for $100, and I'm looking to give all the proceeds to that to Farm Gospel Press to help them come up with some new equipment. They need some new equipment, kind of broken down right now. So go to my website. You can pick up the number 1 issue for $100, and all the rest of them are going to be $25 for the 14 that are remaining. So go get you one. All the proceeds of the first 15 copies are all going to go to Farm Gospel Press to help them get some new equipment. So I'm excited about this. If you've been enjoying the series on Elijah, then you'll enjoy this. This is only volume 1, and we're going to continue. There'll be a volume 2 of all the stuff that I'm doing in the coming weeks. So this is volume 1. Get you one. You'll enjoy it. God bless you. All right, let's get started. You can go to robertstoffel.com and give to Whitey's tip jar as well. So do that, and I'll be happy to give her some. She comes to my house across the street, and I'll fix her up. So God bless you. It's good to be back with you. Let's get started. Grace Coolidge, the wife of President Calvin Coolidge, tried to surprise her husband by having his portrait painted. When it was finished, she hung it in the library of the White House, and later the same morning, the president happened to walk into the library accompanied by a senator. And they both stopped and they stared at the picture together in silence. And finally, President Coolidge commented quietly, I think so too. But what did the senator really believe about the portrait? Why did the president think he knew the senator's thoughts? Now, we don't know if the senator was thinking the same thing as President Coolidge, but we think that everybody else is. That's the problem that we have in society today. And here's the problem we all face. We think we know what everyone else believes and thinks, and especially when nothing is said. It's called a collective illusion. And so I've been reading a wonderful book by a guy named Todd Rose, and I recommend it to you. It's called Collective Illusions, and this is what he writes. Collective illusions are social lies. They occur in situations where a majority of individuals in a group privately reject a particular opinion, but they go along with it because they incorrectly assume that most other people accept it. When individuals conform to what they think the group wants, they end up doing what nobody wants. And I guess another way to describe this is we go along to get along. And then the loudest people on the fringe are mistaken for the majority. That's what happens. The loudest people on the fringe are mistaken for the majority. So do you know what most people really think? Do you know what they really believe? In July 2020, researchers from the Cato Institute asked if people felt comfortable voicing their private opinions in public. Nearly 2/3, 62% of Americans said no, because they feared others might find their views offensive. So let me get your honest opinion about something. If I asked how you personally define a successful life, which of these answers would you choose? A person is successful if they have followed their own interests and talents to become the best they can be at what they care about the most. Or B, a person is successful if they are rich, have a high-profile career, or are well known. Now, which one of these would you choose? Now, which one do you think most people would choose? If you choose option A for yourself, but thought that most people would choose option B, you're living under a collective illusion. This question came from a 2019 study of more than 5,200 people on ways Americans define success. The result was that 97% chose A for themselves, but 92% thought that most people would choose B. Isn't that crazy? We think we know what everyone else believes or wants or desires. And a collective illusion is when living under a presumed truth when it is a lie. People were wrong about what other people really believed. Now, this leads me to a scene in the life of Elijah, and this is from 1 Kings 18:20 through 21. So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Remember, he ran into Elijah, and Elijah said, hey, look, let's have a showdown, basically, between the prophets of Baal and God, and we'll see which one is the true God. And so Ahab said, okay, and he agreed to this. And so he sent out word throughout all Israel, and he assembled all the prophets on Mount Carmel and all the people. And verse 21, Elijah went before the people and said, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. But the people said nothing. When asked how long they would waver between two opinions, they said nothing. The sound of crickets. And how does this happen? It happens when we self-censor. We self-censor ourselves. That is, we live our private life how we wish, but we don't say what we really think publicly. And their silence is a collective illusion. No one really knew what the other one thought. So while they worshiped Baal, they had never formally renounced Jehovah. Sometimes they worship Baal, sometimes Jehovah, as convenience or impulse dictated, and probably rendering their more public service to Baal, while Jehovah probably had the higher place in their private service and in their thoughts. I imagine that's what was taking place. But they hoped in their hearts that they might not be far wrong from serving both. They wanted to do both because they felt like in public they had to, or they would be, brought out and ostracized. And Elijah's words were not aimed at Baal worship per se. He was concerned with the hesitancy of the people, not their idolatry, but at their double-mindedness and indecision, for God likes decision, not lukewarmness. Remember, he said, I'd rather you be either hot or cold, but when you're lukewarm, it makes me want to just spew you out of my mouth. And so if he could get their decisions right, then he'd get their undivided devotion. See, we stray from God when we stop making decisions and we just drift. And this is why it is said, today if you hear his voice, know this verse, do not harden your heart as they did in the rebellion. And making decisions keeps the heart soft towards God. Are we going to choose life or death? And Deuteronomy 30:19 kind of says this, doesn't it? This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live. And if we could poll the people of Israel that day, I bet privately most of them would say, I don't waver. God is the one true God. But you'd never get them to admit to it publicly. Sure, an authoritarian regime has its effects on people. I understand that. I know that Ahab would cut your head off. But why are people doing this in America? Why are we self-censoring ourselves? And the reason of that is shame. Nobody wants to get on social media and be embarrassed. Nobody wants to get on social media and be shamed. Nobody wants to go out in society and be the only one that they think believes this way, so we just stay silent. We're like the people of Israel. We don't say a word. We don't want to stick out in the crowd. And the way society controls us is that it shames us. Anytime you feel like you're being shamed is a moment where you feel like maybe you should probably speak up louder than you would. Because shame is something that we all must deal with and we must all get over if we're going to live true, authentic lives. In the late 1990s, a former mathematics professor and then the mayor of Bogota, Colombia, he found a clever way to make the fear of social embarrassment work for the public good. When Marcos first came to office, Bogota had one of the highest traffic fatality rates in Colombia, and deaths from motor vehicles crashes had risen 22% between 1991 and 1995. And listen to this, jaywalking in particular was a problem. From 1996 to 2000, pedestrians accounted for half of all of Colombia's road traffic deaths in urban areas. So at the time, Marcos described the city's traffic as a chaotic and dangerous situation, only to be aggravated by the city's corrupt traffic police. So he decided to take a radical step, and he did away with all the traffic cops, and he replaced them with a troop of mimes, or I would call them clowns. You know how they put white on your face and then you just mime everything? So he dressed them in brightly colored baggy pants and bow ties, and 20 professional mimes silently applauded pedestrians who followed the street crossing rules, and they mocked those who didn't. They also ambled around busy intersections making fun of drivers whose bumpers stuck out into the crosswalk. With their exaggerated gestures and expressive white-painted faces, they exhorted motorcyclists to tighten their helmets and stay in their lanes. And by making a public show of people's transgressions, the mimes poked at our natural aversion to being singled out. Marcos reasoned that this public discomfort might prove even more compelling than the traffic fines people said paid privately. And he was right. Given the choice between a solo spotlight of shame and going with the crowd, the vast majority of people in Bogota picked going along with the crowd and not standing out. It was a huge success. The program ballooned to 400 clowns. Can you imagine being on the street and seeing all of these 400 clowns, these mimes, and with neither words or weapons, these mimes were double unarmed, Marcos commented. And so in the space of 10 years, traffic fatalities dropped more than 50% just by shaming people with a bunch of clowns. So we're afraid of being embarrassed. And Todd Rose says our stress levels rise at the thought of being mocked or viewed incompetent. We see this in the life of Gideon. Remember Gideon? God told Gideon to tear down his father's altar to Baal and then build a proper kind of altar to God. And Gideon did as he was instructed, and he tore down his father's altar, but he did it at night because he was afraid of his father and the townspeople. Well, the town woke to a demolished Baal altar and demanded that Gideon be killed, but his father stuck up for him, and he told the townspeople that Baal was a big enough God to revenge Gideon, and if he wanted to kill Gideon, then Baal could kill Gideon, and just to leave him alone, leave him to Baal. So what did the townspeople do? They changed Gideon's name to Jerub-Baal, which meant let Baal contend with him. In other words, let shame deal with him. And society likes to shame its outcasts. And so the reason that we all buy into the collective illusion is because we don't want to be shamed. We don't want to be ostracized. We don't want to stick out in a crowd. And it's much easier just to say nothing. And so we self-censor ourselves, and we say things such as, who am I to speak up? And we also get this kind of shaming in the life of Peter. After his sheet experience, remember the sheet was let down out of heaven in this kind of a trance that Peter went into, and he saw all these unclean animals, and he heard this voice saying, kill and eat, and he said basically, no, I won't. You know, he wouldn't go against his Jewish heritage. And so he finally overcomes this, and he starts eating with the Gentiles and hanging out with the Gentiles. And then we get something in Galatians 2:12 that Paul called him on the carpet for. And this is what Paul writes in Galatians 2:12. But when the Jews arrived, Peter began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. Peter didn't want to stick out. He wanted to stick with his in-group. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy, even Barnabas was led astray. So Peter succumbed to two fundamental characteristics of human nature: the need for acceptance by his in-group and the profound fear of being ostracized from it. You see, we care most about the people with whom we feel the deepest connection, whose praise and condemnation matter the most. And our in-groups, which might share our religion, our nationality, our politics, or our family. It makes us feel safer and more certain of ourselves if we fit in with them. And Peter felt the pull of his tribe, and he fell into the identity trap. And you gotta love Paul for calling him out to his face. So why do we conform when we don't really wholeheartedly agree? There's a little chemical in your brain called oxytocin. It's the bonding chemical, and every time we feel connected to others, it releases in the brain and increases feelings of love for those in the group. So we yearn to do more of what our community expects just so we can enjoy that sunny feeling of being included or admired by those we care about. And that little chemical oxytocin just fires off in the brain. You see, we like that sunny feeling, and so we'll buy into the tribe. We'll try not to stick out from it. So, okay, Elijah asked the people how long they were willing to waver between following God or Baal. And he got back the sound of crickets. And here's a key point. Why do we remain silent? When we remain silent, it doesn't feel like we're doing anything wrong. We aren't blindly copying the group, and we aren't lying about our views. So our private beliefs remain private, and who suffers? Our relationship with God suffers. Only one person was willing to stand up and stand out, and that was Elijah. One man was willing to speak the truth while the rest of them lived by a collective illusion that made them all think that everyone else was okay with worshiping Baal. So did they really know what each other thought? If we go back to that study I quoted in the beginning, 62% of all Americans don't speak up because they're afraid of what their views will be like in public. And Todd Rose writes this: when we're in fluid social decisions where competing ideas, often just two, jockey to find the majority view, most of us will wait to see which way the numbers are going. Once that direction is clear, we join the larger number and reap the benefits, which are, number one, we avoid isolation. And number two, we share in all the rewards of membership in the most popular group. End quote. So, where's the harm in a collective illusion? Where's the harm in the Israelites just saying nothing? The people of Israel marginalized themselves when they went along with the lie. They felt their voice didn't matter anyway, and so many of you out there today feel like your voice doesn't matter anyway, so I'm just going to stay silent. I'm not going to get into the fray and the mix. But you see, it does something to all of us when we remain silent. And they thought everyone else must be okay about worshiping Baal, so they stopped pushing against it. If we remain silent about the power of God and the love of God, then we're setting ourselves up for a showdown. Then we weaponize the gospel against those who don't agree with it, and we start tearing them down instead of building them up. And that's the problem with the collective illusions. Everybody weaponizes against one another, and everybody gets in their own in-group. And we stop building other people up. And when that's removed from society, then that's when society will take a deep, dark turn. Because everybody's tearing each other down, and we're not building each other up. Consider what Paul said. 2 Corinthians 10:8. If I boast somewhat freely about the authority the Lord gave us for building you up, rather than tearing you down, I won't be ashamed of it. He's saying, there was this situation going on in Corinth, and they wanted him just to tear the place down. And he was like, I'm going to build you up and not tear you down. Verse 12, we do not dare to classify, we'll get in the in-group, or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves. When they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are not wise. And you see, that's what happens in the collective illusion. We all are comparing ourselves with ourselves, but we don't really know what anybody really believes. It's just all like standing before that portrait in the White House and saying, yeah, me too, when we don't really know what the other person really believes. And this is always where we get into trouble. We should never classify. We should never be ashamed of building people up instead of tearing them down. Church can be a very judgmental place that likes to classify people and tear them down. And you need to know that some people are in churches to judge themselves and judge you in regard to themselves. And this is Paul's point. So why do we do it? We do it because it is like taking a drug. Todd Rose writes, when we feel we're doing comparatively well, the part of the brain associated with rewards lights up, flooding our brains with dopamine and oxytocin. For instance, the like feature on Facebook and other social media acts as the kind of reward, which is why so many people end up compulsively counting and pursuing more likes. To a certain degree, he says, we're all dopamine junkies. We want to know how we're doing compared to others on social media. And if they start tearing down our in-group, then we start tearing them down, and no one gets around to building each other up. What has happened to society? And this makes church a great breeding ground for judging, comparing, and classifying. At least I'm not like that, is what we say in church. Preach it, Pastor. How many of you ever said that? Then we get that little hit of dopamine and oxytocin, you see. If we're tearing down more than we're building up, then we may be addicted to dopamine hits. And getting a dopamine hit this way is not like taking drugs to get it. So we feel pretty good about ourselves. And this is the danger. Don't be so quick to rush after a crowd. One August afternoon in 2010, a small turboprop airplane carried 20 people, included the British pilot and one flight attendant, into the hot blue sky above the capital city of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And the plane was on a routine round-robin flight to a town 160 miles away with stops in between. So as it approached an airport, the flight attendant noticed something was rustling around in the rear of the passenger compartment, and she went to take a look. And she found a live crocodile looking up at her. And she was, can you imagine? You're in a plane, you got a crocodile. And so the terrified attendant rushed toward the cockpit, presumably to inform the pilot. But one alarmed passenger, seeing her fear, jumped up and hurried after her toward the front of the plane. So in short order, the other passengers did the same. Their combined weight destabilized the turboprop, and despite the pilot's effort, forced it nose down into a house a few miles from the airport. All but one passenger who witnessed what happened died in the crash. And the crocodile survived. So don't follow the crowd when you don't even know what the crowd is running to or running from. Be really, really careful about the way a church grooms people. If you never have a tinge of doubt and always agree with everything that happens, then you're just being herded into a direction that will eventually crash the plane. And the best thing you can do is just take a moment, let a little doubt sit in every now and then. Speak up when you see injustice or classifying. Challenge things. This is healthy. Refuse to drink the Kool-Aid. Back when I was a pastor, that was one of the things I really loved about our church. We had people that had all kinds of different opinions, and we didn't make a big bone about it. We all got along. We all built each other up, even though those opinions differed. And you see, what happens when we all just kind of buy into this collective illusion that we're all agreeing with everything, then we never really understand the pain in the pew beside us. If everyone is just buying into silence, beware of where it leads. And the majority isn't always right. They may just be people agreeing with one another because they want a little oxytocin hit, and your silence makes you complicit. We never know the pain that sits in the pew or the chair beside us when everyone is forced to tear each other down or to lie about what they really feel. I read one time about a pastor who was left in charge of about 80 children, and during this time, he had a little girl ask him a torturing question. He said, I was playing a game called Giants and Wizards and Dwarfs was the game to play because he was keeping these kids, so he came up with this game. He was playing with them, Giants, Wizards, and Dwarfs. So being left in charge of about 80 children, he writes, 7 to 10-year-olds, while their parents were off doing parenty things. I mustered my troops in the church social hall and explained the game. It's a large-scale version of rock, paper, and scissors and involves some intellectual decision-making. But the real purpose of the game is to make a lot of noise and run around chasing people until nobody knows which side you're on and who won. And so he said, I yelled out, you have to decide now which you are, a giant, a wizard, or a dwarf. While the group huddled in frenzied whispered consultation, a tug came at his pant leg, and a small child stands there looking up and asking a small concerned voice, where did the mermaid stand? And he thought, where did the mermaid stand? He said it was a long pause, a very long pause. And then he says, where did the mermaid stand? And she said, yes, you see, I'm a mermaid. And the pastor said, there are no such things as mermaids. And she said, oh, yes, I am one. She did not relate to being a giant, a wizard, a dwarf. She knew her category, mermaid, and was not about to leave the group and go over and stand against the wall where a loser would stand. She intended to participate wherever mermaids fit into the scheme of things without giving up any dignity or identity. So she took it for granted that there was a place for mermaids, and he would know just where. Well, where do the mermaids stand? All the mermaids, all those who are different, who do not fit in the norm, who do not accept the available boxes and pigeonholes. Answer that question, and you can build a school, a nation, or a world on it. And this is what the pastor writes. He said, what was my answer at that moment? Every once in a while, I say the right thing. The mermaid stands right here by the king of the sea, says I. Yes, right here by the king's fool, I thought to myself. So we stood there, hand in hand, reviewing the troops of wizards and giants and dwarfs as they rolled by in wild disarray. And it's not true, by the way, that mermaids do not exist. I know at least one personally. I have held her hand. Don't you like that? So maybe you're wondering this morning, where do the mermaids stand? Maybe you don't relate to giants, wizards, and dwarfs, and you're wondering, where am I going to stand? Am I just going to stay silent and get up against the wall like a loser? Or I'm going to say, this is who I am. This is what I believe. This is what I'm about. Wherever you stand, don't stand in silence. How long will you waver between two opinions, Elijah said. And the people of Israel said not a word. Don't let that be true for us. Let's pray. Father, I'm talking to a lot of mermaids today who don't know where to stand anymore. They don't know what to speak up about or what to do, but help them to be themselves and follow their heart, to speak up about God, speak up about what they believe, and to build people up and not get into this game of tearing people down. We've had enough of tearing down. It's time that the people of God build up. And once we build up, then we're going to find that place where we can stand in authenticity. And we thank you, Father, for it. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, God bless you. It's been hot up here. I'm going to go inside in the air conditioning, and hope you have a great week. And get your book, Elijah. The first 15 are on sale. Number 1, if you'd like number 1. And I hope it's going to be a collector's item that's going to bring you a lot of money one day. $100. Go out and get it. God bless you. Have a good week.